Hi, and welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook. I'm your host, Robin Hunicke, and we're here today with Dr. Mitu Khandaker, who is a professor at NYU. She's also the co-founder of Glow Up Games, and has had many, many adventures in the space of gaming, tech, and AI. She has a PhD in AI. And today we're going to talk a lot about her journey, both in the early part of her career when she was founding companies and getting her PhD, onto her career as an educator, and then onto Glow Up, where she's been working in the space of creating a title with a Black creative lead and a Black co-founder, talking about the representation issues that we face in the industry and also ways that we can change the face of both fundraising and supporting creators of color. It's really fantastic to talk with Mitu. She's been in my life for quite a while now, and it's so great to see her thriving and shining. Her game comes out in a couple of let's say in the fall of this year was what we'll say. And we're really looking forward to that as well. Here she is, Mitu.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers, providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
We're so happy to have you here with us today, Mitu.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks.
Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first fell in love with games?
Ooh, absolutely. Yeah. So again, really, really wonderful to be here. Honored to be on this podcast. So, I wear a few different hats within the game space writ large. So I'm an assistant arts professor at the NYU Game Center. So I've been teaching game design there for the last 6 years now. I feel like that time has gone by very quickly. And then I'm also CEO and co-founder at Glow Up Games, which is a mobile games company creating diverse games for a diverse audience. And really just, our whole thing is that we want the sort of wider industry to sort of wake up to kind of, what we call like the largest hidden audience within games, which is, diverse and marginalized players. So that's kind of our whole thing. To go back to sort of how all this came to be, so, I've done various things in and around the game space for the last, 13 years now. And, the way that I fell in love with games originally was when I was, when I was very young. I grew up in a household, I'm from a South Asian background. So I grew up in a household with with a lot of sort of relatives, very large household with, older cousins and uncles and a lot of chaos and a lot of playfulness. But in those days, so my older male cousins and uncles would basically have, whatever game consoles were around. I remember, the earliest ones I remember were the Commodore 64 and Sega Master System, which we had in the UK. And basically I would just, sneak into their rooms and try and play games when they weren't around. And eventually they caught me and relented, and they were like, okay, fine, we'll give you our hand-me-down consoles when we're done with them. So I then sort of grew up in a context where I was, I'm the oldest of 3 sisters. So I was kind of playing games with my younger sisters. And that was just something that we would do together. And my mum would also join in, and then she'd be like, don't tell your dad that I was playing games. So it was a sort of fun it was like I have just very fond memories of kind of playing games with my family. But I think like a lot of people, I didn't realize that making games was something you could do until a little bit later. I was definitely in that sort of category of like, I guess games just grow on trees or something. But I actually realized, hilariously, because of the old Nickelodeon show, Clarissa Explains It All. Clarissa herself as played by Melissa Joan Hart, who would go on and play the original Sabrina the Teenage Witch. But she would occasionally do this thing where she was trying to problem solve whatever her like issues were with her bratty little brother or her parents, and she would make a game to try and solve her problem. And I don't know, I don't actually remember how many episodes this actually happened in, but I know it made a big impact on me because I realized like, making games. And so I think it's one of those cases that I say now of if she can see it, she can be it, just even something as silly as like representation on this like old Nickelodeon TV show of this like 13-year-old girl making games just made a big impact on me. So that's really where the sort of spark came along for me.
That's fantastic. Actually, I don't think I've ever heard of that. And I think it's a great story because it's in addition to the idea that you actually enjoyed the games is that you had a role model. And I think, as we look at the pathway across time, in games like say from when I started in the very early 2000s, you coming on the scene, like when did you sort of come into gaming professionally, would you say? What was
so what happened was in college or university, I did computer engineering to a master's level. And after that, I started on a PhD program in creative technologies, which was, basically I was lucky enough to join that department, which was kind of an inherently interdisciplinary department of like comp sci people and sociology people and other people and, other folks at the University of Portsmouth in the UK, where Dan Pinchbeck originally, who was like one of the first PhDs out of that department. And so he was one of my supervisors. But I started on that PhD, and immediately I ended up doing a sort of entrepreneurial scholarship, which brought me to the US for the first time. And this was 2007. So this was with the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. So they invited me and 9 other grad students from the UK over. And, the idea was that, they're going to implant sort of, entrepreneurial culture from the US to the UK through the lens of like, us 10, various grad students from technical backgrounds. And, and so as part of that, it was basically about 8 months that I spent. I went to Kansas City first, which is where the Kauffman Foundation is based, and they set up this amazing cultural program of us, which was, the first few days they took us to monster trucks, they took us to lots of barbecue. It was that was my immersion into US culture. But that was also the first year that I ended up going to GDC. So that was, it was also the year that I, as part of that whole experience, I spent some time at the MIT Education Arcade. So I was working with folks like Scott Osterweel and hanging out with the folks at Gambit. So yeah, I guess like 2007 was really the time when I sort of entered into that sort of, the sphere of games.
I was just looking because I think my first encounter with you was as the result of the BAFTA Breakthrough Brits program, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So when was that? If your first trip to GDC was 2007, when did you end up in the Breakthrough Brits program? Do you remember?
Yeah, that was actually 2013. So the Breakthrough Brits program. Yeah. So that was, I'd actually been to a fair few GDCs by that point. And I'd had a whole journey up to that point as well. But, I was lucky enough to be selected as a BAFTA Breakthrough Brit in 2013, which was a result of having released Redshirt, which was, my first commercial game that I made sort of solo. It was a real honor because, we were able to, through the help of BAFTA, we were able to sort of request sort of the mentors that we wanted to be connected with. And so on my list, I had put, I can't remember who else was on my list now. I put Will Wright. So I actually ended up spending a day with Will, and I put you. So that's how we ended up getting connected, because I knew you as somebody who, you were doing all the things. You were doing sort of an AI PhD. You were also in, game production. So I was just like, yeah, I want to talk to her.
It's so funny because that, like, if you just think about it, it's like you go from watching this show to 2007, through your own scholarship and interest in innovation, you end up in the US and sort of meeting the GC community. And then by 2013, you're being celebrated, you've shipped a game. Like, that is just like, that's an amazing launch, just to think about it now, like, so rapid. And at the time, I feel like you really stood out because you had finished your degree, you had made your own game and shipped it and learned a bunch while doing so. And I think in that first conversation by then, we were really kind of discussing, your lessons learned and also like what you wanted to do next step. So like, let's go to that 2007 to 2013 period. Like, what were some of the things that you would say were key in that period of time? Like, you're working as a researcher, you're thinking about making games. How were you sure you were going to choose between them? Did you know you wanted to go into commercial gaming? Like, where were you at that time?
Yeah, so in that 2007 to 2013 time period, I actually did various things. And I think this is still emblematic of who I am now, where I just have, like, at my very core, the need to be like, to just be doing several different things at once. I think that's just part of, it's just part of my personality. It's also just, I think, as I've come to term with, probably like slight ADD tendencies. But no, it's something that, it's something that I've learned, to sort of the benefits of, as well as, how to rein that in. But yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us are similar in this space, right? Like, I think there is something about our sort of personalities. But yeah, in that sort of time period, as well as kind of continuing on my doctoral research, which actually was, it was definitely interdisciplinary, like I said. And what I was most interested in was the idea of how do we relate to characters and our sort of emotional experience of games differently, depending on the kind of, the level of like technological immersion that we're placed within, and therefore, the sort of sense of embodiment that we have in a game space. And so this is, this was like before the sort of extra attention got put on VR again, just like, just when like Oculus was first coming out, etc. So this was, I guess I like to say I was a VR researcher before it was like cool, but it was, so I was sort of doing that. But then at the same time, and this is where the sort of like doing multiple things at once thing comes into play. I also actually had co-founded a location-based game startup in Silicon Valley. So in 2009, 2010, I actually took some time out of my PhD, moved to San Francisco for about a year. And, this was in the days when sort of social check-in services were like first becoming kind of becoming the rage, like Foursquare, Gowalla, all of those things. Yeah. And, everybody was talking about the Facebook social graph. So I effectively, just built like a gameful layer on top of some of those things. And it was like this fun, like city building game. And that was also my first experience of doing the whole like entrepreneurial sort of, Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road hustle, as I like to call it. So, trying to pitch to VCs. Ultimately, it was ultimately it didn't work out, even though I learned, tons of great lessons from that. And I'm really glad I did it. But yeah, it was, it was a really great time of just, trying to build something a bit different. That was also the first year I talked at Come Out and Play in New York about the thing I was building. If you remember sort of the early days of Come Out and Play. But yeah, so then after that, I think I sort of felt a little bit burned out in for many reasons after that sort of startup didn't work out. And so I was just like, I just want to work on something by myself. That's sort of a little bit of my own like creative control. And so I was just, hanging out in the indie scene in the UK, and kind of I got wind that Cliff Harris, who, of Positech Games, who had successes at that time with Gratuitous Space Battles and the Democracy games, he was looking to, become a sort of micro indie, as we call it now, a micro indie publisher, as we call it now. So I ended up like pitching the idea that would become Redshirt to him. And he really loved it because he's a huge Star Trek nerd as well. So, it just kind of went from there. So I really credit Cliff Harris of Positech to sort of for giving me that kind of first chance to sort of put just a little bit of kind of funding behind this kind of, this idea I had.
Can I ask you, like, when you looked at the sort of the Sandhill Road phase, right? And like being in that kind of whirlwind of like an emerging tech that everyone is raving about, which is, I think that's kind of standard for fundraising in the Bay Area. There's always a flavor of the month. And you're always kind of raising in the face of some ridiculous raise around that flavor of the month, but then also trying to position yourself as unique and also worth investment. It's like, it's almost impossible not to be a follow-on in those spaces, even a little bit. Because most things are never really that new, right? Like when you compare that experience to pitching Cliff, like what was the measurable difference for you, and like what was it about being in control of your own stuff that was really motivating you at that time? Because I definitely have those urges, and so I'm really curious, as someone who's experienced it yourself, like what was the contrast there for you, and how did it motivate you forward?
I think it was a day versus night experience, like having sort of been in those sort of Silicon Valley VC pitch meetings versus pitching to somebody like Cliff, who, was also just a solo indie developer who'd made it. And he'd made a bunch of money with his games and he was looking to reinvest that. And so he really got what it was to be somebody who, just had an idea that he, happened to really like. So it just felt like a really good sort of not trying to like prove myself to somebody, but more just like discussing some cool ideas. And I look back on that. And again, this is why I say credit to Cliff, because, I really do think I got super lucky with the fact that he gave me a shot. And also I was lucky as well because, I had the backup of I was also just doing my PhD program. And so I had a little bit of kind of, I had my scholarship with that to sort of keep supporting myself. I was also, living at home with my parents at the time. So, and I always want to speak to those things because I think it's really important to call out the things that let us get to where we are. And, like in many ways, my family being a traditional South Asian family in many ways, like the fact that I was living at home with them still in my mid-20s. But yeah, those are all the things that made me able to really spend like 2 years, as I did, building Redshirt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just really interesting because I think as you continue to move through your career, you've had multiple opportunities to kind of take a stance and like in a position according to like power in the industry and how it works and like where money comes from and like and like you, I think I have tried to sort of always keep one foot in education and one foot in commercial gaming for various philosophical reasons. But I also think it's just really interesting once you get experience with a variety of funding situations and company setups that you start to get a sense that like there's no one way and there's certainly no easy way. And so it must have been very healing in some ways to be able to leave something that hadn't worked out and then move on to something that you had a lot of control over, just because it means that you still had forward momentum despite, maybe an unideal outcome, right?
I'm glad you said the word healing because that's actually what it was for me. And there were a couple of other things I'd like sort of noodled on just, before that to try and just like work out some of my creative energy after, this thing that hadn't worked out. Which ultimately, I think that for me, to speak to some of the reasons that first early startup, I think, didn't work out. It's just, I think it for me, it represented like making sure you have the same vision as your co-founders. For me, I was like the person who was like, well, I want to make I deeply love games, and I want to make something that's like a playful, gameful experience. And that wasn't necessarily the same page as my co-founders. So,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm glad that it didn't work out, because, it wasn't going to, if it didn't work out then, it wasn't going to work out longer term. So,
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to, that's why I was like, I just want to move away from that and do something that is very much a game, and cannot be sort of, turned into some like product, as it were, right? So that's really how I was coming at it.
And so by the time that I met you, you had launched Redshirts. The mobile market was really starting to pick up. There was a lot more competition in the space. And if I recall correctly, at that point, you were like, okay, well, I did my second thing and I learned a bunch of lessons there. And now I'm kind of like, maybe I should really like consider moving forward in the academic space so that I can continue to do research like this, but maybe without all of the market pressures that were associated with being in mobile at that time. Because by then it was really getting competitive. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, and to be clear, like after, so, all of that time, my parents were very much sort of, on the, well, when are you going to finish your PhD kind of messaging. I was lucky enough that Redshirt did well enough that, by that point, I could spend a year just finishing up my PhD. And that's what I did. Like Redshirt funded me finishing up, like being able to support myself for a year and finish my PhD. And actually, for me, at that point, I was kind of ready to be done in some ways with academia after spending that year in that space. Because I was just like, I just want to make, like, I'd really enjoyed, like, shipping Redshirt. And, I was like, I just want to make games, as an indie commercially now. What ended up happening, actually, was I ended up sort of applying, actually, to NYU Game Center because this, because I saw that there was an opening for an assistant arts professor. Funnily enough, and I don't often tell this story, but I wasn't sure about going for it initially because, and from a sort of self-belief perspective, actually, from a like, well, like, am I good enough to do something like this? Like, I don't know. Like, I probably need tons more experience. And what happened was the day that the applications were about to close to apply for the position at NYU Game Center was the one day that Gamergate came for me. And I was lucky as well because I know, obviously tons of my colleagues and friends and acquaintances have had much worse experiences than I have, of course, with Gamergate. But that sort of Eye of Sauron turned to me for one day, and that was the day that applications were going to close for NYU. And honestly, like, it fueled me. That's what happened. Like, it fueled me to sort of say, like, I had all of these people, like, atting me about, like, not what, like, all sorts of insults and how I shouldn't be in space. And I was just like, F you, F you. Like, I am going to be here. I love games. I'm going to, like, make an impact in games. And so I'm applying for this job. And I, like, wrote up my entire application in, like, a couple of hours that night. And ended up, long story short, I ended up getting the role. So
that's amazing. Because I remember you were like, in our first conversation, sort of saying, like, I think I have a shot at this. Like, they've called me for an interview, and there was competition for the role. And I remember telling you, like, go for it. Like, this is an awesome opportunity. But I had no idea that was the
story of how it came to be. Yeah, that's right. Because I called you to sort of say, like, should I do it? Should I not do it? Yeah. And I think, one of my concerns as well was just being able to, like, keep making games as well on the side. And luckily enough, and I know this is similar to what you do as well, but, they very much, they very much encourage all of us as faculty to be active practitioners. So, I think that was something that was super important to me, so that I could have, one foot in in academia and in teaching, and one foot in, just making games commercially.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the wisest games research labs and interactive sort of creative technologies programs. I think they recognize that the practice is the research, and you need to be making games and learning in new technology spaces and studying interactivity to really push the envelope with your own teaching as well. And so it's we're both very lucky
yes,
to be in those contexts. I think that they're sometimes quite rare, depending on the nature of the university or the program itself. But it is actually something that we've been lucky enough to have Jesse Schell on the podcast as well, who's also been able to sort of craft a space, between the two that integrates the two, and where one practice feeds the other, which is awesome. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like you're in London, you're living with your folks, you make your own money making this game, you finish your PhD, you get the hat and the puffy hat and the puffy gown, and then you come to the United States and just move to New York City and start teaching in this new program. Like, did it feel like a complete change of pace? Was it, I mean, you were already in London. So like, what was that like for you? Like moving into that space?
It was definitely a change of pace, and it was, a lot of different things happened at the same time as well. So I ended up, being one of the co-founders of Spirit AI around that time as well, which, was a games AI tools company that I co-founded prior to Glow Up. And so, I was working on like a few different things in addition to really finding my feet with teaching. So, this was 2015. So I look at sort of that 2015 period, 2016 period as just like, I was incredibly busy. Like I was working a lot, and I don't think I've actually ever stopped. I really sort of set the pace for everything else. But like I've said, this is kind of a part of who I am, that I need to be doing these different things. And honestly, for me, like all of these different strands of my roles, like, as you say, do feed into each other. I think that being an active game developer and practitioner just does make me a better teacher. And for me, teaching is also the way that I know a lot of people talk about like giving back when it comes to teaching. I feel like, it's probably going to sound bad, I feel like a little bit of like a lich when it comes to teaching. I'll tell you why. It's because like I get energy from my students. I really do. Like I get energy for all the other things that I do when it comes to game design and making games, just by, being able to teach and mentor the next generation. Because just, you know what it's like sometimes this space can weigh you down, right? And you can get in a place where you just need to like find that reset and like where that energy comes from for you. And for me, a large part of it comes from my students.
Yeah, actually, I have an appointment later today with a grad student, and I'm really looking forward to it, just because it's actually a totally random and like not necessarily game related thing, like a film, independent study film, about a white supremacy group that lived up here in the Santa Cruz Hills. And so looking at the relationship between that group and Santa Cruz and stuff. And I'm like, wow, let's talk about this and let's unpack this. I'm so excited to hear about the project. And that's not even really in line, with quote unquote normal games research, if there is such a thing. But I think that you and I are probably, like we've talked about many times, like on the spectrum, extremely interested in a lot of things, polymaths, programmer, artists, designers. But also we really love being in the realm of ideas and feeding off that space of like collaboration and conversation, creative abrasion, problem solving, like actively moving through the world, trying to understand systems. And I think, this is something that like when you just, you tend to kind of casually breeze past things like, oh, and I co-founded Spirit AI. These are like really, these are huge things, like many people in the audience that are listening to you are probably getting ready to embark on a career and are thinking about this. And it's like, I think it's very important to hold space for the fact that like you got the puffy hat, you moved to New York City, then you also started a startup with people from a variety of walks of industry, including people from IBM, right?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
You were bi coastal in the like most extreme way. You were like living part-time in London and living part-time in New York City. Like your life was like jet set and like glamorous. I remember just thinking like, what a rock star. Like how is Mitu doing it? You know, like when does she sleep? And then of course later you realize like as you start to have those situations in your own life, you're like, oh, you just sleep on the plane.
Yeah, that's right. You just sleep on the plane. Yeah. Remember planes. I'm just like, I don't even, it's like a whole other life. It's true though, because with Spirit AI, I co-founded that company with people from, senior people from IBM. And also, the thing that I love so much about having, spent that time, building those early days of Spirit AI were being able to work with people like Emily Short. So like we ended up building like a really cool team. I think like ultimately, I ended up, deciding in 2 years ago, basically, I ended up leaving and, co-founding Glow Up, because I think the thing as well that I realized that I was kind of missing was, so a lot of my time was going to, being split between teaching and the kind of stuff that I was doing at Spirit AI. But, I really did miss as well, like making games, right?
Yeah, I was going to say it's that same feeling of wanting to make something gameful versus like
exactly. It's interesting because I feel like I've had two phases like that in my career, and sort of and that's definitely what led to Glow Up. And also, I think increasingly, I guess I've had this sort of growing feeling as I'd had this growing feeling as sort of the years were going by of, well, I definitely, I love sort of working at the intersection of like playfulness and like whatever other cool like technical stuff I can get my hands on. But at the same time, like I do care a lot about representation, as we talked about earlier. Like, as a brown woman in games, it took a long time for me to come to that journey, actually. And I remember I gave a rant at 2013 at GDC, one of the game design rants, which was actually about sort of race representation. And I was terrified when I did that. I really was. So this was one of one of those 10-minute rants. And I remember umming and ahhing for ages because I was like, what am I like really angry about that I want to rant about? And I remember sort of this was the time when we were having more and more conversations about gender representation, but I can hardly see anybody talking about race representation. And
well, it takes one to do it, right? I mean, this is part of the problem is that back then maybe there weren't enough advocates in the space to speak to their true lived experience.
Yeah. And, there were definitely some people having those conversations. Funnily enough, Latoya Peterson, who, spoilers, later became my Glow Up Games co-founder, she was talking about it and she was writing about it. But I remember being terrified because I was like, well, because of all the conversations that are happening now about gender representation, I feel more comfortable actually talking about the fact that I'm a woman in this space, in case you haven't noticed. But I don't feel comfortable talking about the fact that I'm a brown woman. Because, I think that, honestly, like you know this as well, but for survival, like you end up sort of, trying to make certain parts of yourself invisible, right? Yeah. Yeah. And you end up sort of making certain parts of yourself small. And so I had a whole journey with sort of, being vocal about the fact that I care about, that I care about being represented. It sounds so sad to say it, It's like, do I deserve to be represented? I don't know. For the longest time, I thought I wasn't. And that's the thing that's so tragic. So, but so by the time I came around to founding Glow Up Games, I think just also being inspired by all of the things happening in, adjacent spaces like TV and film, where creators of color are being able to tell our own stories more, and feeling like simultaneously, I guess, inspired by and frustrated by the fact that, that was happening, but it couldn't happen in the same way in games, for all these like systemic issues. And so that's really why, I got together with Latoya and we just, we started this thing.
Yeah, I was going to say that I feel like, when my first game design rant was about gender, and it was probably 10 years before that. It was like,
Yeah. So we've had a similar journey with these things.
So it was like in 2002, maybe. And
Yeah.
it was part of Frank Lance's rant, and I just leased 2 minutes of it. So I felt so uncomfortable talking about gender that I only took 2 minutes of a white guy's rant to talk about it. And it was actually a tongue-in-cheek presentation about the some cheesecake photos that were aligning the walls of GDC as you walked in. And I just sort of said something like, it's so great to be here and feel, so represented, equally. And of course it's great, not to have anything in the conference hall that reminds me of the fact that my gender is considered less than. And the whole time I was doing it, I was just showing those images behind me, which I had taken photos of and put into a slide deck. And the key criticism of it was that some women had made that artwork, so it was wrong for me to criticize it. That was one of the pieces of feedback I got in the written feedback from that rant. But I remember being exceptionally concerned about it, and that was just a 2-minute rant. So, bravo to you for taking it on and giving voice to that topic at that time. I know it was not easy, and we've had many discussions about this in general, just like how to be oneself without making a part of oneself small. And this can happen inside of a company. It can happen inside of a community, right? There are so many ways in which people can feel invisible or silenced or not celebrated, which is one of the reasons why I always try to brag about every single thing you've done because you've done so many amazing things. It's like, I really want to, shine a light on the fact that despite that sort of feeling internally, you were always taking risks. You were always trying to do something great, and sometimes great things don't work out, and that's fine. But right, like it's better than being bored for sure, to have the adventure. And like when you finally decided to go with Glow Up, like how you had this experience of pitching, right? You'd already been in the VC space. You'd done technology, sort of technology gamification and or playful technologies. You'd also done stuff to look at communities and AI and management of these spaces. Like, how did you sort of define Glow Up with LaToya? Like, what was that conversation like?
What was so interesting is that when LaToya and I got together, it's because, she and I, and this is back when she was at Disney and ESPN. So she was doing a lot of cool creative stuff from, from like a digital producer's side on there. She was like doing video. She was doing, she was just doing a lot of cool projects. And she and I were basically brunch buddies because she would come to New York pretty often, or we'd see each other in like different cities. And we would just talk about the sort of shared love we had for, for AI and for like VR and AR. And it was interesting because when we got together, we were sort of coming at it from the angle of, hey, we're both like, just creative technologists and designers who, are really interested in telling like interesting stories. And it was sort of, it wasn't necessarily okay, we're going to start a company to like really change the picture of diversity in the games industry. But it was more of a like, the stories we tell are going to be diverse just by virtue of like who we are. And if we're starting a company from the ground up, like how would that look different than what is sort of traditionally out there? But as we sort of continued on our journey, it was interesting because we didn't see ourselves as being a company who would work on sort of third-party IP ever, but the opportunity came along to work on a tie-in game for HBO's TV show Insecure. And so we ended up sort of, having discussions about that and then jumping on that, because one of the things we realized is that if you look at the sort of ecosystem of tie-in games for, TV shows, it's always the white TV shows that get the most sort of support. Yeah. You don't see black and brown. Yeah, like you don't see black and brown shows getting anywhere near the same level of sort of tie-in games or comics or whatever. So we were like, just from a philosophical perspective, it's so important for us to support like what Issa Rae is doing, because she's absolutely one of these people that is, changing the way in Hollywood, etc. So we decided that it would be a really great way for us to, plant the flag for who we care about. And, so it's been a really wonderful journey working on that game. But honestly, one of the other things it's taught us is that, the sort of journey we've been on as we've defined glow up games over the last couple of years, we've realized this problem goes deeper than we even imagined when it comes to the ecosystem of funding, when it comes to the ecosystem of data that's available about like marginalized players. And so these are all things that we're now trying to address, because we're like, the games industry has been dropping the ball on marginalized audiences for such a long time because they sort of know we're here, but then they don't really care that we're here,
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way that we're coming at it. So we're really excited to have built a really amazing team. We're about 9 or 10 people now. And it's been tough, but we're doing it. We're doing the thing.
Well, and that's actually, I think I've been having a lot of thoughts lately about this as I look out over 2020 and 2021, and even to some extent 2019, right? Like the latter half of 2019 was also kind of challenging for a variety of reasons. And, there's kind of like in the games industry narrative, there tend to be two narratives. And one is, I founded a studio on my own and I made a hit game, and now I'm just trying to take that prestige and that money and continue to make hits, right? And there's kind of multiple paths off that vector. And, some of them are like, never did as well as the first game. Some are like followed up, but nobody ever really loved anything else. Like it's kind of like the rock band analogy, where it's like, well, the band had, I don't know, everything after disintegration is awful, or whatever you're going to say about The Cure, there are some people that just are purists and so on. And there's like a lot of auteurism and like privilege in that narrative. And then also like just, people saying like, this is how I've lived as an artist. And you think like, well, actually you have parents that you inherited a massive room and you live in a huge penthouse. Like, what do you mean? You live as an artist, like you live as you live as someone who lives off of that privilege, right? But at the same time, there are these other narratives that are like, I am a serial entrepreneur, or I am someone who is like, the way that I like to position myself is like, I'm really interested in the blue ocean and the bleeding edge and like the places that people are too afraid to go because they probably won't be profitable, but if they are, they'll be hugely profitable,
Right.
Like those kind of spaces. And I think you and I are both drawn to that second narrative. But as I was saying, it has vectors off of it. And one of them is nothing that I try works out, right? Like everything is hard. There's always more problems than I want to address. And like, where are you in your journey now? Like you've been with Glow Up a couple of years, which like, I remember when Phenomena was just a couple of years old, feeling like, wow, this is way more work than I thought it was going to be. I'm making way more mistakes than I thought I would make. I definitely wish that money would fall out of the sky and just be in my bank account. Like every morning I wake up wishing like, several $1 million would just arrive from the stork, like a nice,
wouldn't that be nice?
And then I could just use it, to solve all my problems. But as I've gotten older and moved further and further into that career, it's really become more of like there are waves and you surf the waves. And if you have a good day, you have a good day. If you have a bad day and your board hits you in the face a couple times, you have a bad day. And like learn to be a little more forgiving, I guess. So like, where are you in that space?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a hard 2 years. It really has. And one of those years was a pandemic year, which on top of everything else was not, I'll say this, like we've almost died as a company, like several times, like at least 10 times.
Yes.
And, but that's part of the journey. The fact that we're still here, and we're growing, in fact, is something that I'm, immensely proud of. But it also, I know that it continues to be hard work. I've had multiple people, who've run successful startups before say, which is the thing I really believe, which is that, the problems never go away. They just turn into different problems and come faster and just turn into sort of, you get more used to dealing with certain types of problems. And that's definitely been true. So, I think that we're in a sort of interesting position right now in that we're sort of a few months away from finally being able to ship our first game as Glow Up games. And I think that once that's done, that's going to, allow us to actually, walk the walk that we've been talking about. And, I'm really excited to do that, and, really excited that we get to do it in partnership with HBO and with Issa Rae, who's also, an investor in the company now. But, along the way, it's been interesting because, as you say, you wish that $1 million would just fall into your lap. But at the same time, the thing that we've thought about a lot is, who we're bringing on this journey with us in terms of investors. So, in some ways, it's good that, $1 million perhaps didn't fall into our lap from the wrong people at the beginning. For instance.
That's a very important thing to remember and to keep in mind.
Yeah. And instead, we've had to go through what feels like a slog sometimes, honestly, of fundraising and taking smaller checks. And, what's interesting is somebody told me probably about 18 months ago, 6 months, I'd say, into the Glow Up journey, that I shouldn't raise small angel checks because a year from that point, the company would be dead.
Well, that's an interesting perspective.
It's an it was from a VC, a seemingly nice VC.
Always full of opinions.
Yeah, always full of opinions. And so I was very much, you read all the founder books, you read all the business books, and you sort of, you're told you have to set your minimum check size to something pretty large because otherwise you're going to spend all your time. And I was like, yeah, I get it. I get why people say that. But at the same time, it's true that you raise money from where you can raise money, and you build a sort of cohesive family of investors who support you along the way. And that's been the thing that we've been able to do. We're proud to say as well, Emily Greer is one of our investors. She's been so amazing. Great. And you introduced me to her actually, Robin. So yeah, she's been incredible. But yeah, that's really what I'll say, is that it's been a hard journey, but it's feeling like, we definitely had just a hard time during the pandemic year, during COVID. Latoya is my co-founder Latoya is a mother of a 7-year-old. So she's been doing the whole pandemic parenting thing, which on top of running a game startup is a lot. But we're here, we're doing it. And
absolutely. I think that this is the sensitivity that I think we have as smaller companies and startups in general, during a pandemic time is really about those hiccups in the family lives of the people that we lean on the most, because there's always an infinite number of things to do and not enough time to do them. When you're undercapitalized. But I also think it's so fascinating and important to kind of call out this issue with the idea of a small check or a big check, or what I've heard is a lot of small checks just confuses your cap table, and makes it look bad. And, I haven't taken a lot of small checks, but the people that I've taken smaller checks from are very important to me because they've done amazing things, found Slack or whatever, and this is there are some people that you just want in your bus,
Yes.
kind of sort of kibitzing and backseat driving a little bit because they've been on the journey before and they're too exhausted to really try, but they'll definitely give you the hey, that's a big rock up there, you should probably turn left.
100%. That's
important.
Yeah, that's what we've been able to build. And I can't wait until, we're at a point where we can sort of announce sort of more fully, who's going to be on our cap table, because I'm also just proud of what a diverse cap table it is. So yeah, and, it's taken longer, but it's worth it because, as you say, you get the right people who are in your corner.
So when you think about this sort of space and thinking about iterating towards something successful across a variety of vectors, I sometimes get the feedback that to build a business, you shouldn't focus on the company. You should focus on, other things. To what extent have you really tried to make this about being able to support one another and create an encouraging environment for, for Black women, for brown women, for people of color, for queer folks? To what extent have you really made this part of the mission? And if you can talk about it a little bit, why?
Yeah, totally. The thing that we always say is that we're not only trying to change representation of like what's on the screen, but also behind the scenes. We're also not just trying to, I think some people who definitely don't get it are just like, oh, you're just taking like existing kinds of like game systems and just like putting black and brown avatars in instead, just like color, like just color swapping them, and which isn't true at all. Like we're building games from the ground up, which are deeply rooted in our various cultural experiences. The Insecure game, for instance, is has a large sort of like freestyle rap creation component to it. Which, I was really excited about that. And also, our lead, our sort of director of audio and lead rap designer is an actual rapper, Samus, who, is a sort of amazing rapper in her own right, with her own following and everything. But, we've been able to bring people on this journey with us who, represents the kind of future that we want to see in games. And often what that means as well is, focusing a lot on mentorship, focusing a lot on, investing in people who, perhaps wouldn't have automatically been able to wouldn't like necessarily thrive in like toxic AAA type environments, right? So I think that, trying to build opportunities for people, build a pipeline that we can, where we can help people find their feet in the industry as well. Like we have, because of wearing the NYU Game Center hat, like we have a very active like internship program, which where with some of our students. So one of our students who, was an intern for a semester and a summer at Glow Up, Geneva Hayward, they ended up they work for us part-time around school. They graduate next year. So, just trying to just, build towards honestly, like the industry that we want to see.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is it's so important. And like in your time, like pulling from the circle of founders and stuff, like, I know you've worked with Manveer, like who are some of the people that you have really learned from and who've been helpful that you can give a shout out to, just to give people out there an idea of like where that network is headed? Because I think that's also something that is important for people.
100. Yeah. 100%. I'm really glad you asked that because Manveer Hair is like one of my best friends. And, as he was so he's, the founder now of Brass Lion Entertainment together with Brian Adabi Smith and Rashad. And basically what the messaging is from people who, well, I guess I'll frame it this way, right? So when we've pitched Glow Up before in the past to people who quite frankly did not get it, right? So often these were investors in like tech, etc. They would say things like, oh, well, what if another company comes along and, starts putting brown avatars in their games? Or what if Epic starts putting brown avatars in their games? And I was just like, well, good. Like that's what we want. And asking us to like list competitors in terms of like diverse game companies. And it's like, you're missing the point. Like what we want to see is
what's
more
the
of
competitive
this
landscape of brownness in the games industry?
Exactly.
It's like, it's not really on that level, man.
I love that. Yeah, the competitive landscape of brownness. But no, Brass Lion are doing their thing, and we call them our sister company in a lot of ways because we're very close with all of them. We talk all the time, and so we see ourselves as part of this wave of people who are doing the thing, right? And often people who've been in and around the game space for a while, who are now like just doing the thing when it comes to building your own company. The support as well of people like Eka, Chandana Eka Naye. So just like so great, and just I'm so grateful to know everybody in those spaces. And really, it is about finding your network, and it's about finding your people, and it's about finding the support circles that are going to help you get to where you need to go, because it is such a hard journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the long run, we hope to see, the timelines for people to get into the industry and into positions of authority where they're able to bring their full selves to work and make decisions that are impacting gameplay and the look and feel of games. Like, we want that to move from being a 20-year journey to a 15-year journey and now to like a 5-year journey, right? And so it's like it's really important, in both of our companies, and I think Manbear as well, like, this work you talked about of the way we think of it is it's almost deprogramming and de-escalating the cost of hidden bias, unconscious, but very present racism in people's perspectives and the ways they conduct themselves at the office that have impacted people before they even come to your doorstep, right? Like so many students and so many, new hires experience this wave of microaggression and like not being taken seriously, or like the worst is someone who's very senior, who's been in the industry for a very long time, being treated like a baby, like they don't understand what's going on. Like I have senior Black colleagues in gaming who have to sort of interrupt to be experts, which is absurd, and like the same thing with the funding landscape, right? Like this idea that you would have to create the competitive landscape in this way, which would just never come up in any other pitch by a white person or a white man,
Yeah.
It's like, it's very bizarre.
What if there are other white avatars in games?
It really just think about how absurd the workload is of having to endure that question, B, answer it, C, like have an argument about it. Like like you said, it takes up space. It makes this thing which was invisible, the racism of the person involved, very visible and present in the room, and it turns them from an ally into someone that is now like the antithesis of that. Someone who's really adding pressure and focused to things that don't make sense. And like, it's so critical to work against this.
This also reminds me of so I want to also shout out to Bree Code, who she's doing amazing things with her company True Love, and I saw her tweeting recently. She had a Twitter thread about basically like the trauma of fundraising was at least one of the tweets in there, and and that was really and like I think that's something that it gave me pause because it's something I feel, but it's not something that I have like let myself frame as trauma, if that makes sense, before. And it really gave, and I think that's something we don't talk about enough, right? So fundraising as a traumatic process.
Yeah, actually the competitive nature of it, the way that people in the space often really engage in a lot of gossip and like open-ended speculation about like why things happen. Like I actually find the environment of people raising money just in and of itself full of what, Stephen Covey would call quadrant 4 behaviors, like over anxiousness, like self-serving perfectionism, idle chatter and idle speculation and gossip about people who are more successful than you or who are failing. Like it seems very, very socially kind of mean girls in a way that I've never really understood. And then it's been so refreshing over the last 2 years, like to have people like Emily, my friend Jill, and you and others in the space to actually have an open conversation about it. I was in a conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone who literally said, as VC, we're educating ourselves about the abysmal ratio of investment in women and women of color and people of color. There is a real problem in our industry and we want to fix it. And like, that was the first time anyone has ever said anything like that to me in the 20 years that I've been in the business. I thought, wow, like that's a huge change. And then the question, of course, is, well, will it really result in concrete change?
I think that's the big, and I think a lot of people love to talk a big game about that, especially, over the last year. And a lot of people obviously made a lot of, premises in the wake of George Floyd and everything that happened around racial justice last summer. And honestly, like this is where I say traumatic, right? Because we've pitched to VCs who have openly said, oh, we are like making a commitment to fund Black people and especially Black women, and like, and then won't even like consider, consider me in the toya, right? Yeah, and it's like, and they'll say a lot of things about like, well, we can't find anyone to pitch to us, and it's like, we're here. So it's stuff like that, and a lot of it, I brush off a lot of it,
You have to.
You have to, and it's that's a continuation of the kinds of survival that we do as marginalized folks, right? Like you sort of, you keep going no matter what. But I think it is, these are the things that add up over time, and it's important to be able to sort of take a moment and say, no, this stuff is traumatic. This stuff is hard, and you need to make space for kindness for yourself, and space to celebrate the small wins.
Yeah, I've actually found a lot of encouragement over COVID through the Instagram wallpaper positivity artists, like, hello, my name is Wednesday. A lot of it is like queer or trans related, but like, it's just focusing on this notion of like, you deserve to rest. You deserve the space to be creative. Like, not everyone can just get up every morning and do 12 hours of phone calls and emails and fundraising without wanting to just like punch their partner in the face or like kick their dog or like just cry.
Yeah. And well, something I think about a lot, Robin, actually, is something that you've said to me many times. And I know this is something you say to a lot of people, which is your mantra of I'm doing the best I can. And I actually I honestly, I say that to myself a lot, especially in times when it gets hard, because as you've told me before in our many chats, like that I am literally doing the best I can. Like that's literally what's happening, So I'm grateful to you for that piece of wisdom.
That is very sweet. I mean, I think that, if anything, I'm grateful to you because I get a lot of insight from your experiences as a woman of color, as an immigrant, as someone who's lived in two communities, as a person trying to both index into but also hold perspective on those communities.
Yeah.
Your whole life. And also two countries, like thinking about how that feels and like and understanding, like, I think the very first time we spoke, you were still very, very young, and you had been making a lot of your life invisible and parts of yourself invisible just to get through it. And we had that moment where I was like, listen, if everything is so awesome, then you don't need me. Like, you don't need my help if everything is going great. And that was when we were able to kind of get to the meat of whatever was bothering you at that time. And I think it's so hard for us to be vulnerable and trusting when the environment around you is constantly saying, yes, but not you. Yes, but not this idea. Yes, but not this brown. Or yes, but not this black. Like somewhat black, but not black, not too black. Or this is black, but not black enough. These are conversations that Black creators have been telling us they've been having for a long time about their movies, their books, their comic books, their Black Panthers, these things don't just happen the way that they can in other contexts. And I think that you've been, honestly, I mean, I believe you are exceptional in your ability to both pivot and constantly stay up to speed with what's happening in the industry and to continue to always be at the forefront, but also to continue to give back. Like, I mean, people always say, like, how do you do it? And I say, well, I'm doing the best I can. I think the other thing is I'm doing it because I care. And you too really do care.
Yeah, 100%. And thank you for saying all that. That's really kind of you. But yeah, no, it's interesting because, I do care. I do care a lot. And, I think that one of the things, what you're saying about sort of, being able to be vulnerable is very true. And this is why I'm grateful to you for like creating that, for giving me that space to be able to do that. Because, you do, I think, as somebody who doesn't fit the mold of who is usually represented within games, you put up this sort of like, no, like, I know, like, you have to sort of project this sense of like,
confidence.
Impenetrableness, right? Yeah. This confidence, impenetrableness of like, of no, there is no vulnerability here, because because people doubt you so much, right? So you have to do that. And so, yeah, as you say, it is difficult to put that down sometimes. And one of the things that I'm trying to do more of is, is try to be more vulnerable with just in general, like, and stuff like social media and, because I think people tend to make assumptions about like the ways that you are or aren't struggling. Like I'm definitely somebody who's like, oh yeah, I'll post about my successes, but I don't post about my, like I post about my W's, not my L's,
Yeah.
And, that's something that, in thinking about the next generation of developers coming up, they need to see that humanness. They need to see that vulnerability because they need to know that that this can be them, right?
Yeah, actually it's so true. And I was giving a talk actually recently at a small advocacy group for women in gaming and tech called Hackbright Academy. And one of the girls in the audience asked me after my little brief, this is how I got here, but, these are the privileges. And so, don't expect the ladder to be the same. And also it's changed. I give that little bit of talk, which I actually first wrote for speaking at NYU at your Game Center. And she said, so I really admire you for being an entrepreneur and I don't think I can do it, but what would you say are the key sort of strengths that every entrepreneur should have? And I actually was like, I just don't believe there is any such thing. Like markets are incredibly dynamic and diverse. You could be an entrepreneur in literally any space. The only thing that it takes is you wanting to do it and then believing that you can and like doing the best you can. Like, there's a lot of literature out there that is like, this is how I succeeded. So you will too, if you do exactly as I say. And then you go, well, wait a minute. You started your investment firm in 1969, when the United States dollar was at its highest value of all time, or, whatever privileges that they had historically, locationally, racially, gender-wise, and so on. Like, yeah, it's awesome that, you graduated and went to HBR and then you ended up being hired into this firm at Wall Street and slayed the commodities market or whatever it is that you did. Like, those are not helpful, right? And it's only the people that broadcast their failures and talk about how little they actually knew to start with, especially statistically. We're so bad, right? I mean, this. People are so bad at numbers. We suck at small math, but we also suck at large math.
Yeah.
We have terrible rules of thumb. This is where most of our bias comes from. And like living as a person who knows this, it's incredibly important to sort of share with the people around you and in the next generation that like, yeah, those are just bogus rules of thumb and they don't really say anything about you. They say a lot about lack of education in this space, lack of awareness, lack of data.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's funny you saying, because one thing I do want to add to your sort of reflections on what makes, what skill should a great entrepreneur have. For me, I would say it's actually resilience. Like, I think the number one skill that entrepreneurs need, and also, quite frankly, the skill that should get funded the most is resilience, because ultimately that's like how your money is going to work out as an investor, right? You need a company that is going to be able to keep going. And honestly, this is where the sort of the way that this stuff works is so messed up, because that's not the way that investors think. They don't think about resilience in the way that they need to be, because who has necessarily historically had to be the most resilient? It's marginalized people,
Yes.
So this is why, this is why I like fund marginalized creators. Like we are the most resilient in many ways because we've had to be.
Yeah, I've had some very charming conversations with people more recently that are not really in the VC space, but who really cherish the idea of longevity and investing in the future of the planet, and like understand that games and the systems that we build inside of games can educate the future generations to collaborate creatively and solve problems, much like the story at the very beginning of the interview, right? Like this is actually, game design is a skill because it's design, and like game design is really systems design and systems thinking and thinking about systemic outcomes. And this is exactly the kind of logic that helps us decolonialize, promote to promote actions, that are anti-racist and like pro-queer and pro-woman and, pro-Black. Like you have to actually understand how the systems fight against that. Yeah. And this is what game designers do, right? It's what our students do. It's what we do. And it's what makes it so important. And I just think that when you look at, Dr. Khandaker's career, you have had so many wins. And I think that it really does stack up, the little L's that you maybe don't share as often, but that you have survived through have really stacked up to what is already like a really phenomenal career. And I just want to, say that I think that you should be and are, certainly to me, but to so many others, you should really be held up as an example of someone who has stayed resilient in the face of these challenges and has pushed so hard to make a positive difference. It's excellent.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that.
It's really true. So when are we going to get to see this game? When does it come out?
So it's going to come out to coincide with the next season of Insecure. So we're going to be soft launching before that. So, but yeah, certainly this year. So it'll be out this fall.
Yay! That's fantastic. A preemptive congratulations and a huge, the wind at your back, may it go smoothly. May all of your investors be able to just celebrate with an ear to ear grin on having made a fantastic bet on a fantastic team, fantastic franchise, and a fantastic creator. I think you're really making waves out there. Me too. I appreciate you, and thank you for spending this hour with us in your busy schedule. I know you're probably too busy to take a nap, but if you get the time, please do.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to go straight. I'm opening up Unity again after this, and I'm going straight back in. So, but no, I always cherish talking to you, and you've. Just there's so many shared touch points, I think, between our experiences. Always love relating those to you. So yeah, thank you for this time.
Yes, thank you so much. And with that, we'll close it out. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.